It is my great pleasure to introduce everyone to Elizabeth Carlson from Tricon.
Thanks, Lisa. I appreciate the introduction. I'm going to start with the technical challenge of trying to share my screen. So let's see if this works. I know you all probably had a much more challenging technology journey the past few years with the COVID virtual learning. So we're all used to these new times. All right. Well, as Lisa said, I'm just going to take a few minutes to kind of talk about what I'm doing in sustainability at Tricon, the sort of broader role around our initiatives in climate and plastics and recycling, and hopefully it might be relevant to some of the work that you'll be doing with students in the coming year or years. And then a little bit about why we see education and the work that CELF and all of you are doing to be so important to this overall mission and goals that we have. I think we'll have time for questions, so feel free to jump in or ask anything as we go or at the end here. Like Lisa said, I lead sustainability for Tricon Energy. Just to give you a background of what that is, we're not a Pepsi or a Coca-Cola that you probably have heard our name before, but we're the second largest privately held company in Houston, Texas, and we operate in about 140 countries around the world. Basically, what we do is buy, sell, market, and move different chemicals around the world. So basically, everything you use or have has chemicals in it. Your phone, your soda can, your plastic cup, all of these things are made from products that we're trading or buying or selling in one way or another. We group them by sort of classic chemicals, which you see listed. If any of you are chemistry teachers, maybe you'll know more about these products than I will. Raw materials, which also includes like fertilizers and sulfur and things like that. And then the plastics, or what they're called in raw form, which is polymers. And then our new product line, sustainable products. So this is where we're trying to shift some of these traditional chemicals that have a larger environmental footprint and transition them to equivalent or alternative products that have a smaller environmental footprint. So that could be products made from biomass materials rather than from fossil fuels, or it could be products that are made from waste. That could be, bio waste, or it could be something like a recycled plastic or recycled product. And then we also classify products that are low carbon. So you could have, a chemical that traditionally used natural gas in the production process, and now they've switched to solar energy. And so they've reduced the amount of carbon that goes into that product. And we will track that and say, okay, this product has a significantly lower carbon footprint than another product that's similar. So that's kind of who we are. I mean, we define our purpose as efficiently and sustainably connecting the world with essential goods. So essentially, we want to make sure that people are able to access what they need, the building blocks of all these products around the world, regardless of where you are. A lot of these products are produced or made in specific geographies, but helping to make access around all developing and developed countries to these products. Now for us, we have this commitment to sustainability that we launched in the end of last year. If you've followed sustainability at all, if you're interested in environmental and social themes, you've probably seen a lot more news articles and engagement over the last 2-3 years on this subject. I've been working in the field about 15 years, but I would say over the last couple of years, everything has just exponentially grown. A lot of attention, good and bad, to sustainability now, and a lot of companies taking this up, as well as school districts, local governments, and other stakeholders. So for us, we created a sustainability vision, I would say, and that's the statement you see on the left, that we can't solve all of these problems immediately, and we can't transition all of our products overnight. The reality is the world still depends on plastics and basic fossil fuel-based chemicals in almost everything that we produce, but that we do want to start this journey of our activities contributing to a lower environmental impact and what we call net zero, or having very low to zero carbon emissions, a circular economy, and then a more just, equal, and inclusive society. So both the social and environmental piece. We set up these 3 pillars. So one on social and economic inclusion, which we define as everything around how we treat our people, how we engage communities, diversity, equity, inclusion, human rights, all of these kinds of topics, health and safety, and so on. And then protecting the environment for people, ecosystems, and climate. So this is all of our work around how do we reduce carbon footprint, essentially, other types of air emissions and pollutants, mainly through our supply chain, trying to help warehouses and terminals and vessels and chartering companies and so on to find solutions that are lower environmental impact than traditional sources. And then the third one is circular economy. So part of the issue we have is that we're not just going through an energy transition right now, which you've probably heard that term a lot in the news. We're going through what I call a circular transition as well. So the traditional model, particularly in the US, is consume, 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 throw away. And that really, as we all know, is not sustainable in the long term. So that requires a lot of shifts in how we design products, how we purchase products, market products. And that really requires a full systems level change. We think we can help in the sense that we deal with all the players along the value chain of some of these base chemicals, and hope that we can kind of bring different parts of the value chain together to make that market really work in economic terms, but also in global trade and so on. And then we see that as supported by a foundation of ethics and integrity, and making choices that integrate environmental and social impacts into financial considerations and so on. That's the base. If you don't do that, you can't do anything else. But these are our kind of sustainability goals for the company. Just to give you that quick intro into what that means from a company standpoint, and I think this is, for me, interesting from an education standpoint, in that you guys are teaching the future leaders and business leaders, and so many of these themes when I was in school just didn't exist, right? There were no sustainability degrees. We didn't talk about these things in college so much. And now there are so many pathways and opportunities for kids to start engaging with these subjects and then grow into careers as well. So what do we actually do in these kind of different aspects of sustainability from a corporate standpoint? When it comes to the ethics and decision making, a lot of it is about just creating policies, management systems, reporting, sort of the infrastructure of the company that makes these decisions easier from an environmental and social standpoint, where you're not just thinking about the bottom line and the money, but you're also thinking about the things that maybe aren't as easily quantified in terms of your impact on people and the environment. So we spent a lot of time on that this year, and we achieved this platinum EcoVadis sustainability rating, which basically assesses how we're doing on all of these policies and actions. And we, feel good about it because we got the platinum, which is the highest you can get, and it puts us in the 99th percentile of companies. But we want that to communicate that to other companies, to say, it's not that hard, you can do it too. If we could get this done in 6 months and achieve these policies and processes in our company, then any company really can take these steps and take these actions. The other aspect is really just compliance and legal, how we work with different regulation all around the world and try to make sure that each of our transactions, how we do due diligence on our supply chain. So we work with 4,000 business partners around the world. How do we make sure that they're also doing their business in an ethical way and respecting human rights? All of those processes are captured here. And then the second part on the social and economic inclusion, you can see some of just examples of the activities we do under this, giving back, volunteering type fundraising programs, but also working internally on things like women's empowerment and the gender pay gap and representation. We're doing something now targeting our board diversity to make sure that there's gender representation, So these are all things that, employees, people in the company are working together to achieve. And then our training and community projects, which I'll talk a little bit about in a second. On the environmental side, we think it's important for companies, government, really everybody to set goals to reduce waste and reduce emissions. So we've achieved what's called net zero emissions in our scope 1 and 2. So if you're familiar with the world of climate and carbon footprint, that basically means any energy that we directly consume or purchase from the grid. But when it comes to what we call scope 3, which is every business relationship we have, all the emissions that are associated with their activities and their suppliers' activities and just the whole value chain across the board, that's where we have a really big carbon impact, over 3 million tons of what's called carbon dioxide equivalents. And those are basically focused on the actual products we buy and sell, and then the transport of those products, mostly via ships around the world. So we've done a lot of work there. And then the circular economy piece, like I mentioned earlier, there's this idea of, can we replace traditional products with sort of more sustainable products? And there are various certifications that we participate in to try to make these products more accountable and trustworthy, to show that they really do have a better environmental footprint than the alternative. We're also part of an alliance that I'll talk a little bit about, called the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. And this is about $1 billion fund that looks at how the industry across the entire value chain, from Pepsi, who's selling the products, to the packaging companies who are making the chip bags, to the people in the middle like us who are buying and selling the raw material, to the producer of the plastic at the beginning of the value chain and the extraction of the materials that go into plastic, that whole value chain coming together and saying, we have to solve this problem of plastic waste in the environment. How do we do that? And how can we accelerate some of the infrastructure and policies that are required to get there? So that's a big global initiative happening now. Now, how does that kind of intersect with the social, right? So we've got this idea of, we need to transition from the circular economy. We need to do more when it comes to climate. But at the end of the day, we're all people. You all are interacting with kids and parents and communities. And for us, it's very important that our people, our employees, the communities where we work are doing well. That means we have to really transform business over the next 20 to 30 years to take into account all of these climate and circular changes or transitions. But we have to ensure that that transition is also just, not just from an environmental standpoint, but in terms of people, communities, neighborhoods, different sectors of society. And that's really the challenge that's ahead of all of us, I think, as educators, as business people, as leaders. How do we help make that transition, benefit the most people possible while accelerating some of these very critical changes that have to happen pretty fast? What we've decided is that we're going to invest all of our what we call social investment, so our sort of giving to the community or involvement in the community, in what we call Project Zero, which is any project that contributes to the aim of zero inequality, zero emissions, and zero waste. So whatever we support should be focused on those three things, or at least two of those three things. And that kind of is part of the relationship we built with CELF to say, okay, education is a big part of this, but not just any education that takes into consideration inequalities in schools, access to resources, environmental justice issues, but also helps people in the future generation understand concepts like emissions and waste and how they affect them. Currently, we're targeting these programs in Colombia, India, the US, Ghana, Turkey. They look a little different in every place, but the hope is that our investment maybe is small drop in the bucket of the entire amount that's needed. But we want to make sure that what we do spend is going towards those objectives. And to give you an idea of what's happening in the broader industry, the plastics industry, the oil and gas industry, the retail and brand industries, like I said, there's a lot of focus on this idea of plastic waste and circular economy. Circular economy is not the same as just plastic recycling or plastic waste. It encompasses all materials. So this comes into agriculture, especially regenerative agriculture. It comes into how we use any type of material, what kind of material we use. And there's really 3 principles that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation lays out. If you're interested in the circular economy theme, definitely encourage you to check out Ellen MacArthur Foundation. They're kind of the leading authority on circular economy. And they define it as eliminating waste and pollution, circulating products and materials, and then regenerating nature. So it can be any of those things, and recycling is really just a small part of it. But the initiatives that we're following really closely, some of which we're part of, are the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, like I mentioned, and that's a global alliance, a lot of very powerful companies coming together, trying to make change. Similar, Ellen MacArthur Foundation has a global commitment, which is a lot of brands and also a lot of like packaging companies and things like that, who are committed to reducing the amount of sort of waste, plastic, and things that are going on and making their products more circular and designed in a better way. And then there's the Plastic Pact, which is present in a lot of different countries. The US has a Plastic Pact as well. And they really advocate for policies and legislation that would help enable the circular economy, because we do need the right policies in order to make these things work for the economy. And the Recycling Partnership is another good one. So they work with a lot of cities around the United States to look at how we can strengthen the recycling infrastructure, which is very disparate across the US. I mean, I think we have people on the call from a lot of different states, and probably all of your states treat recycling different. Probably all of your school districts treat recycling different. And that's part of the problem, because we can't get this common standard or common market yet for the US on how we treat waste and how we recycle. If we could get that, it would help create a more stable market for some of the recycled products that are coming out, and also just create more equity. One of the things we've seen a lot with the schools is that schools in wealthy or wealthier neighborhoods with strong PTOs will have access to recycling in their school. They'll have green teams and they'll have all these resources, but schools outside of that, won't have any access to recycling infrastructure. And the same with communities. You'll see one county that decides to take action on recycling and has a really strong program that's well resourced. And then you'll see another county that does the bare minimum. I mean, Houston, for those from Houston, we're one of the worst. We don't have institutional recycling programs. We don't have multifamily programs. So if you live in an apartment, you don't get to recycle unless your building decides to do that voluntarily. Only if you own a house or rent a house, usually in a nice neighborhood, then you get recycling access, right? So there are a lot of equity issues to be dealt with in the US, and that's part of what some of these initiatives are trying to address as well. The other equity piece is, how do we treat waste management and recycling producers, right? We have people who work in these industries, and especially in some parts of the world, like the project we're doing in Colombia, these are people who are, looked down upon in society or earning very low wages. And so a lot of our work is, how do we help these people become formal workers where they have Social Security and they have, decent wages and all of those things. And then just quickly, how does this connect to education for us? I think you all probably know better than I do, but what I've seen in my career working all around the world in a lot of different cultures and communities is that 2 things have to be present for any change or any improvement. One is the actual access to infrastructure. So if you want people to drink clean water, you have to give them the wells and the access to clean water that's convenient and easy. but you can give access to infrastructure and the infrastructure completely fail if you haven't done the work of education and culture. And so for us, any program has to have both components. If we want to change school recycling, we have to give schools the access to recycling infrastructure, but we also have to give them the culture and education that will help kids understand, and teachers and janitorial staff and maintenance staff and everyone, how this works and what to do. And the second is just developing the future, right? I mean, the kids that you all are teaching, you know this very well, are the future regulators, the future voters, the decision makers. They're going to be the people making demands for consumer choices. And this whole project that we're doing, Project Zero, on Houston recycling, which I'll spend a minute on, was actually the idea of my 4th grade daughter. So she came home from her Title I school and she said, there's no recycling in my school. I'm bringing my water bottles home to recycle. And I said, really? You don't have recycling? And so she did her school project on, waste management and recycling in her 4th grade class, and found that it wasn't just a problem for her school, that in fact, the entire district in Houston did not recycle. And that kind of inspired a program where I was hunting down everybody in Houston Independent School District saying, what's going on? Why don't you have recycling? And we found that they are planning a pilot program and looking at a district-wide approach. And so Tricon sponsoring this program and working on a partnership with the district to really help roll out the standards, the infrastructure, the training and curriculum from an institutional level. Meanwhile, we have the partnership with CELF to look at teaching and how we can engage students in these civic science projects. So a really nice kind of connection on why this education is so important, the people demanding it, kids demanding it, and the future jobs, right? I mean, everybody, especially in Texas, they're very concerned about employment and economics. And the reality is that the circular economy is estimated at $4.5 trillion. So these are real jobs, and we're doing a disservice to our kids in Houston, especially in public schools, especially in low-income neighborhoods, because we aren't preparing them for that new economy that's out there. A lot of people are stuck in the way it was 50 years ago or 20 years ago. And the reality is that the economy is changing, and sustainable jobs or green jobs are on the rise and employing more and more Texans for sure. And just one stat to leave there is that, 53% of Gen Z, which is kind of, I guess, your high schoolers and beyond, say they actively participate in the circular economy. And this is what's driving a lot of the changes, right? People know that the kids are the future consumers. And so they're starting to change how they make products and what they do. And that's really the potential of, kids getting involved in these activities to start signaling to regulators and business that, hey, you guys need to change too. The world is changing, the economy is changing, our kids are changing and demanding more of this. So that's just a little bit of an overview. I don't know if it was helpful or not, but if you have any questions or anything, I'll just pass back to Lisa.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah, we would like to open the floor for any questions or just any additional clarity that you're looking for. Yes, ma'am. Go right ahead, Miss Patty.
So Elizabeth, I just want to say kudos to you and what you're doing, and how awesome that your 4th grade daughter is, an advocate and everything. That is super amazing, super awesome. I'm actually from Houston. I am also at a Title I school, and I just wanted to learn a little bit more about the pilot program that you talked about for recycling. When I first got there about 2 years ago, I had approached our administrators to ask, hey, is there like a recycling program here? I know we've got the bins, but like, is anyone recycling? And so they didn't give me a very clear answer. They said that basically everything gets put into the dumpster and then they sort it out later. Is that really true? Yeah, that didn't seem like it would fly either. I mean, how do you do that? So has this pilot program been in the works for a long time, or are we going to be seeing anything different come out of it? Or
I hope we're going to be seeing something different. So there is some sorting that happens after collection at what's called a MRF, a municipal kind of facility for managing waste. But usually that's looking for things like aluminum and metals, which are easy to extract out of the landfill. At that point, though, it's already reached the landfill like environment. And so the high value like plastics, for example, are contaminated. So they're not going to be as good of quality as if they were separated and cleaner at the source, where you can get a higher value for those sort of clean plastics. So they're supposed, in 2013, HISD did an initiative, and this is probably common in other school districts as well, where they got a grant from TCEQ, the Texas Environment Quality Group, to buy bins and donate bins to the school. So bins, that's probably why you have bins. We don't have bins at either of my kids' Title I schools. We don't even have the bins, but some schools have the bins because they took advantage of that program, or because somebody bought them, you know, at some point, a PTO or something like that. But there's no contract with the district for recycling. So if the school is able to contract directly, they might have, you know, a few schools may have done that. I know there are a few schools in Houston who have their own independent recycling programs apart from the district. But this pilot is aiming at making it district-wide. So the idea is that they're going to adopt about 20 schools as focus areas to test out the program this year and understand, like, what are the barriers, you know, what's happening, what are the problems, and then try to fix them and create a district-wide standard that would roll out, you know, following that. Now, all the janitorial staff in Houston are going to be trained on how to recycle at their school, and will have the options to order bins this year.
Oh,
so that should start in September. The school should be getting communication on that. And, you know, we're going through the process of finalizing an MOU with the district because we want to give them a grant to really make sure this works and that it doesn't become like 2013 where it starts, but then, you know, for whatever reason, drops down. So we're going to really try to support them and see if we can make this work within the next, you know, 12 to 18 months where all the schools have access. So that's the hope. That's the plan now. Of course, everything depends on the leadership, you know, within Houston and all that. But so far, they're committed to getting this off the ground and getting going.
Elizabeth, have the 20 schools already been identified as who those are going to be?
I don't have the answer to that one because it's very much an HISD question. There were they wanted to make sure that it was a representative sample and that there was, you know, equity in the 20 that were selected. So the last time I asked, about last week, they hadn't disclosed the list. They may have it, but they haven't disclosed it.
How would you recommend a public charter school to go about, you know, having some sort of contract with the city to do recycling at their school? Because I'm with Harmony Public Schools. I don't know if you've heard of these charter schools. Wondering how we could get.
That's a really good question. I mean, I'd be happy to kind of try to
talk about it
a little bit. Yeah, but for anybody like on the call whose school doesn't recycle, you know, there are a few models to look into. One is via the district, right? That the district leads the program, like we're doing HISD. But for example, I was just talking to the former head of the Broward County, Florida, and I think some of you may be from Florida, school program. And she said that what they did was the city, or actually the county, managed all of the recycling for all of the schools in the county. And so it was a contract between the county and the school board. So I'm not sure, you know, with the charter side, whether that's something that could be part of the school board contract with, you know, with the charter school and with the city or with the county, or whether it would have to be related to the district in this case. But it's a good question to explore.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead, Miss Kelly.
I was wondering, when you're doing these initiatives like the recycling, which I understand, I'm getting more knowledge about circular economy, are you following the chain to find out where the recycling is ending up? So for example, at my school, we pay for recycle, but now we have to pay the recycling company to take our recycling and our paper. And we have the same thing going on with our plastic recycling. They put it all in the same garbage truck and tell us that they're going to sort it out later. So what I'm wondering is, have you followed the chain, and especially being with a company that's involved in moving things around, et cetera, where is the recycling going?
This is a really important question because there are a lot of, I mean, I wouldn't say scams, but maybe greenwashing around what's happening to waste. So there's been some cases where people said things were getting recycled and then somebody did digging and actually was getting incinerated. So it wasn't going to landfill, but it wasn't, actually being recycled. I would say the main driver right now that's helping with this situation is that these products are getting higher value. So for example, PET, like nobody wants to throw away PET, even though the US throws away 60% of it, because it has a really high value and it's really in high demand. Everybody wants recycled PET. So that's helping with some of the issues of like them just kind of like, yeah, we're recycling, but actually like going, because if they can get money from it, right, they're gonna get money from it. The problem is that there's no national standard on this, like I said, right? There's no federal, you need to do this. This is what counts as recycling. This is the accountability. So it's up to every city and county how they're doing that and what contract they have with their individual waste vendor. Some vendors are better than others. And so they're, they do have an active recycling program and they're really, trying to get the most value out of this. And some are, just maybe not as interested because it doesn't have as much value for them. And so they'll just do whatever. The other issue is contamination. So most cities in the US do mixed recycling. They don't separate like in Europe. But if you throw in a chip wrapper in Houston, that's not accepted curbside. So the recycling company, if they want, can say, well, this entire truck is contaminated because there's a chip wrapper there. So it's all going to landfill, right? I mean, they shouldn't really do that, but that's an option for them. And so that's where education becomes really important too, because we have to make the stream as clean as possible to sort of prevent that excuse of contamination. And contamination has fees for the cities, fees for schools, and so on. Now, the only places that should be mixing waste with recycling are places that have like an advanced MRF. And there are a few places, not so much in the United States, more in Europe, where they have really advanced sorting materials and they can do a really good job of sorting things before it goes to landfill. But that's not as common in the US. So I'm not sure where you're from, but that's an issue depending on the community where you are, how it looks. We're really trying to push for the accountability and like certification of these materials. So in the projects that we're a part of, like Columbia, where we are actually going to fund a recycling infrastructure and education program, part of what that project does is work directly with the waste collectors, the recycling associations, and the buyers of the recycled material to make sure that that chain is working, to make sure that the transportation, the warehousing, the sorting, the processes. And then the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, that's a lot of their focus as well, like making sure that the sorting facilities are working, that the infrastructure is in place to collect things. But the US, maybe I should have said this in the beginning, the US has, I think, a 9% or 12% recycling rate overall. So we're terrible. In India, the recycling rate is 90%. And India doesn't have any of the resources that we have. So it's really inexcusable that the US is leading consumption and has one of the lowest rates in the world of recycling. But there's a lot of problems. It's a systemic issue. It's the education of sorting, it's the collection. It's, like you said, getting the companies to be honest and transparent about how they're sorting the waste across the value chain. It's the regulation that we need. So there's just a lot of issues to tackle.
One last question? So we have time for one more.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Any like resource that you would recommend, maybe like a book to kind of learn more about this, like the PET thing. I had no idea about that. Anything you recommend?
I would recommend for circular economy in general, just going to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, because they have a lot of great resources available, like educational resources, studies, research on all things circular economy all around the world. For the US, the recycling partnership is pretty good, you know, of just, I mean, I'm more an online person these days than reading the books, but the subject changes so much. The Alliance to End Plastic Waste also has some good resources up about like the challenges and some of the barriers. I would say like start with those resources, the US Plastic Pact, like I mentioned, basically the big initiatives that are trying to tackle these problems, because they're investing a lot of money in looking for solutions and trying to understand what the key barriers are and how we can address them. You know, there's industry is supportive. This is something that's changed. Like in the past, companies were kind of like maybe against recycling a little bit, right? Now there's really not an excuse for change, because the big chemical companies, the big plastic companies, like we're all the ones. I'm calling the Houston government saying, why don't we have a recycling mandate for multifamily housing? This is ridiculous, you know? And so everybody's on the same page that this needs to be done. But yeah, we need to get more people like engaged in this and advocating. And those sites provide a lot of good resources on kind of how to do that, how to engage schools. For schools specifically, Pepsi has a program on recycling. So they have a website with a bunch of resources on how schools can get involved in recycling and challenges with schools too.
Well, thank you very much, Elizabeth. It was such a pleasure to have you here and to pour into the teachers and their journey. So thank you very much.
No, thank you all.